In this lesson, we'll learn of a few important concepts to keep in mind when using dynamics in Maya. So in this scene, we have a really cool sword asset, and what we'll do is add a particle effect to it. Let's say we go ahead and add a flame effect to the blade of our weapon. So to get started, what we'll do is first move over to our Dynamics module. We'll go to the top left-hand corner of Maya. We'll go ahead and switch from Animation to Dynamics. By the way, the hotkey to get to the same module is F5. Alright, so now, with our mesh selected, let's go ahead and press F8 to go to component mode. We'll now go ahead and grab all of the components that are part of the blade. So let's go ahead and marquee select to grab them. And then we can hold down Control and drag to deselect any points we may not want selected. So this is really simple. We just want to grab the points that are part of the blade. Fantastic. Now, we can go to Effects, and we'll go ahead and create a fire effect. Let's go ahead and move to our option box. Alright, sweet. So according to the default settings, if we were to click Apply and minimize our options, when we hit play, you'll notice that, hey, even though we had those points selected, the fire effect has been added to the entire weapon. Not cool. Imagine if a character was holding the handle. They wouldn't be holding that handle for too much longer, now would they? So let's say we do this. We'll go ahead and undo back to remove that effect. Let me go ahead and show you a better option, something that would work best for our needs. So instead of having this emit using the surface type, let's go ahead and use the omnidirectional type, meaning that it's going to move in all directions but according to the points we have selected. Now when we choose create, take a look at what happens when we hit play. Now our particles are being emitted from just those selected vertices. Cool. Let's say we do this. We'll go ahead and take our timeline here and we'll set it to an end time of about 3,000. And I'll go ahead and show you why. So whenever you're doing a simulation, it's best to work with play every frame. So that's one really important concept. And that's so that Maya can evaluate every frame correctly in your simulation so you get something that is a bit more accurate, more polished. Now how do we do that? Well, we can move down to our animation preferences right next to auto key, and we can just make sure our playback speed is set to play every frame. It might be set to real time, 24 frames per second, or if you went to settings and you switch this to, let's say, 30 frames per second for games, again, you just want to make sure that underneath your time slider, this is set to play every frame. I'm going to go ahead and switch this back to 24 frames per second, however. That's because this is what we are using for our animated sequence. So we don't want to throw our timing off, right? Fantastic. Now if you wanted to, you can set a max playback speed. So let's say if your playback speed should be 24 frames per second, you can make sure that your play every frame mode caps out at 24 frames per second. So that's super safe. Let's go ahead and do that, and we'll click Save. Fantastic. So when we play through this, Maya goes to work and it creates an effect. Now this is just how Maya interprets the effect in the viewport. If we would actually like to see how the effect looks, we need to go ahead and render it out. So we could always create a quick render at the top, and I'll go ahead and bring this over. Chances are you want to see it, right? Cool. Now the blade is actually using a mental ray shader. That's why we don't see the blade, but this is a really cool invisible sword effect, right? If we wanted to, we can go ahead and switch our render mode from My Software to Mental Ray. And now when we re-render this, take a look, now we can see our blade and the effect. How cool is that? In just a few clicks, we're able to have this happen. Now, you'll notice that if we try to, let's say, scrub on the timeline and then kind of scrub back, looks like we're having some trouble here, right? Well, something to keep in mind about the dynamic simulation is that Maya is going to play it through as we play the animation forward in time. The only way to scrub through a dynamic simulation is to first cache it out. And by caching it out, it's essentially a way of baking your particles. So we'll go ahead and have a look at how that works a little bit later on in this course. But as of right now, just keep in mind that To see your simulation, you'd first want to jump to the start of your sequence, which in this case is frame 1, then you'd want to play it through. Alright, sweet. Also, something else to keep in mind, as we start to move this weapon, let's go ahead and select the weapon, we'll press F8 to go back to object mode, and we'll start to move it around. You'll notice that the effect does not follow, because again, this is based off of time. But let me go ahead and show you something. Since it is based off of time, we can use a really cool feature in Maya to get an idea of how the particle will look as we start to transform our object. So, again, going back to frame 1, we can now move to solvers and choose interactive playback. Let's go ahead and hold down Control Shift, and then we'll click on this option to add it to our shelf. Fantastic. So now watch this. If we go ahead and use interactive playback, we can now start to translate our weapon. We can also start to, let's say, rotate it just to get an idea of how this will look as it animates with our object. How fun is that? Cool. I'll go ahead and stop this back and go ahead and reset the weapon, setting its transforms back to 0. Sweet. So these are some things I wanted to point out to you. Whenever you're using dynamics, again, make sure that you are playing back every frame, just to make sure every frame is evaluated. Also, keep in mind that unless you bake your particles or cache them out, you won't be able to scrub through and see how the particle effect looks. Now keep in mind that once you cache out your particles, it's baked, right? So what that means is that in order to make any further changes, you'd have to remove that cache and make changes afterwards. And we'll learn more about that as we start to work through our scene and add particle effects. Fantastic. So that's it for this lesson. In the next lesson, I'm going to go ahead and introduce you to Maya's N Dynamics module, and from there we'll go ahead and learn how to add some really neat particles to our scene.